Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be talking about big data analytics.
BDA.
BDA, yeah, exactly. And you know how it's changing the way we make decisions,
Yeah.
especially those like strategic decisions in business and stuff.
Yeah.
But particularly how it like interacts with our intuition, like our gut feelings, especially when things are complex. Like
Yeah.
you're under pressure, you got to make a choice.
Exactly. Those mental shortcuts we use, right? Heuristics.
Heuristics, that's the word.
Yeah, they're based on our experience,
Mm-hmm.
Rules of thumb, sometimes even just gut feeling.
And what's so cool is how BDA doesn't like replace those completely.
Right.
It actually helps us refine them, which is what we're going to be getting into.
Yeah, that's what's fascinating.
So the source material for this deep dive is a research article.
Okay.
It's called How Does Big Data Analytics Shape Human Heuristics Adaptation in Strategic Decision Making?
Catchy title.
I know, right? It's from the Journal of the Association for Information Systems.
Oh, cool.
And one of the really interesting things they point out is how BDA helps us make better decisions when we're facing a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah, makes sense.
Like the world is unpredictable.
Right.
So before we get into like all the specifics of how it works,
Okay.
maybe a real world example would help ground this.
Sure.
The research talks about how CEOs and CFOs.
Oh, the big wigs.
Yeah, exactly. Like when they use heuristics for big decisions, like where to allocate capital,
Smart.
it turns out that like 60% to 70% of them actually consider stuff like the reputation and confidence of their division managers.
Interesting. So they're trusting their gut, but also maybe past experience with those managers.
Exactly. It's a classic heuristic, right?
Yeah.
Using what, to navigate a complex decision.
But you said BDA can actually like shape these heuristics?
Yeah.
So how does that actually work? Is it really different from just like informing our decisions with data?
That is a great question, and it is actually different.
Okay, I'm all ears.
So the research actually lays out 3 ways BDA shapes these heuristics.
Okay.
They call them modes of adaptation.
Fancy.
I know, right? So the first one is called alternative-reorienting.
Okay.
So think of it like this. You're heading in one direction, but then BDA steps in and it's like, whoa, hold up. There's a totally different path that's actually way better.
Oh, so it's not just tweaking your current course. It's like revealing entirely new and better options you hadn't even considered.
Yeah, exactly. I know, mind-blowing, right?
Yeah, that's powerful stuff, especially like a business context.
Totally. So do you have like an example of this alternative reorienting thing in action?
Yeah, the researchers used this great case study of a company called T-Video.
Okay.
They were like a mobile eating company.
Uh-huh.
And they were looking to expand into new markets.
Makes sense.
And initially, they thought like, oh, music would be a natural fit for us.
Yeah, totally.
Then their BDA was like, nah, actually the market for video mega search is way bigger.
Whoa, so BDA helped them completely ditch their initial plan and move in a completely different direction.
Exactly. It's pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And that's just one of the modes.
Right. We still have 2 more to go.
Okay, hit me with number 2.
All right, so the second one is called Q patching.
Q patching, okay.
And this is where BDA helps us see those things we might have missed.
Like what?
Like those crucial bits of information that can totally change how we understand a situation.
Oh, interesting.
You mentioned this pinning mechanism earlier.
Right.
I'm actually kind of curious, how does that work in practice?
Sure. So in Q patching,
Okay.
BDA is basically highlighting this key detail that you didn't realize was important.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this good example in the research from a company called S-Social.
Okay.
They were trying to improve their social networking app.
Yeah, social media is tough.
For sure. And their BDA found this surprising insight.
What was that?
So it turns out whether a user synced their address book was a really strong predictor of how engaged they'd be with the app.
Wow, so it's like BDA shined a spotlight on this tiny piece of information.
Totally.
That we might have totally overlooked, and then suddenly it becomes this key factor in our decision-making.
Exactly. Crazy, right?
Yeah, that's wild. Okay, so what about that third mode of adaptation?
All right, so this one's called relation conditioning.
Relation condition.
And this is where BDA gets really sophisticated.
Ooh.
It helps us understand the relationships between different factors.
Okay.
Like, it's not just about seeing the individual pieces, but understanding how they all connect and influence each other.
So BDA is like helping us see the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Uncover those hidden patterns.
Exactly. You got it.
Okay, so do you have an example for this one too?
Of course. So the research highlights this case study of a company called X-Payment.
X-Payment.
They were developing this automated risk control system for online payments.
Oh, that's a tough one.
Yeah, for sure. And their BDA revealed that the relationships between all these risk factors were way more complex than they initially thought,
Mm-hmm.
which allowed them to make this way more sophisticated system.
Wow. So basically, X-payment shows us that BDA can uncover those hidden complex relationships between things
Yeah,
that we might totally miss with just our intuition alone.
absolutely.
This is all super interesting.
Yeah.
But I imagine how effective these different modes are probably depends on the situation, right?
Oh, for sure.
What happens when things are really uncertain? How does BDA help us then?
That's a great question. And the research actually digs into two key dimensions of uncertainty:
Okay.
complexity and dynamism.
Okay.
So complexity refers to how interconnected all the different factors are.
Like how many moving parts there are.
Exactly. And dynamism refers to how quickly things are changing.
Okay, so if I'm getting this right, complexity is like you're trying to solve this puzzle with 1,000 pieces,
Mm.
and then dynamism is like someone shaking the table while you're doing it.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, and when you've got both high complexity and high dynamism, it's,
Oh man, forget about it.
yeah, it can be so hard to make good decisions.
Makes sense. So how does BDA help us in those like really tricky situations?
Well, when things are really complex, like that X-payment example we talked about,
Right.
BDA can be really valuable for that cue patching and relation conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
It can help to see those crucial details we might have missed and how they all fit together.
So it's giving us like a more complete picture even when it's really complicated.
Exactly.
Okay, so what about when things are changing super fast, when dynamism is high?
Then BDA can guide that alternative reorienting remover T video.
Yeah, they were able to switch gears so quickly.
Right, because their BDA basically alerted them to that opportunity.
So it's almost like an early warning system,
Yeah.
helping us adapt to like a constantly changing world.
Hmm,
You mentioned that pinning mechanism earlier.
I did.
Can you explain a little more about how that works?
Sure, so the pinning mechanism is a key part of how BDA helps us adapt our heuristics.
Okay.
Basically means BDA keeps one element constant while it experiments with the others.
So like a scientist doing an experiment.
Exactly. You have your control group,
Right.
and then you change one variable at a time to see what happens.
Got it. So, but I'm guessing there are times when that pinning mechanism can actually be a problem.
There are, yeah.
Why is that?
Because in situations that are both highly complex and highly dynamic,
Uh-oh.
everything is in flux. You know, it's like trying to hold on to something solid in the middle of an earthquake.
Whoa.
There's no stable ground to pin anything to.
That's a great analogy. Okay, so even BDA has its limits.
It does.
There are just some situations where it can't give us those clear-cut answers.
Right, and in those situations, we have to rely on our own judgment and experience.
So that business sense you were talking about.
Exactly, even with incomplete information.
So it really is about that partnership between human intuition and BDA.
Absolutely, we need both to navigate those really tough situations.
For sure. Let's go back to T-video for a second.
Okay.
They were initially super excited about short-form videos, right?
Yeah, they thought they would boost engagement.
Because they're easy to share and all that.
Right, and their BDA actually supported that idea initially.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it showed a correlation between short videos and sharing.
Interesting.
But then they realized something important.
What's that?
People were sharing the videos, but they weren't actually watching them.
Ah, so engagement wasn't really going up.
Nope.
So the BDA showed a correlation, but it didn't tell the whole story.
Right.
What happened then?
That's where their understanding of user behavior came in, their business sense.
Mm-hmm.
They realized that sharing wasn't the key metric they should be focused on.
What should they have been looking at?
User retention.
Ah, so they had to look beyond the data and use their judgment to interpret it correctly.
Exactly. What did they end up doing?
I'm guessing they shifted back to long-form content.
They did, even though the BDA initially pointed them towards short form.
That's such a good example of how BDA and human intuition need to work together.
It really is.
But what about those situations where the pinning mechanism just isn't an option? How do we adapt then?
It's fascinating, actually. Even when the pinning mechanism isn't viable, humans still tend to adapt in ways that mirror BDA's approach.
So even when we're not consciously trying to copy BDA, we're still learning from its methods.
Exactly. It's like it's subtly influencing our thinking, showing us new ways to approach problems and adapt to change.
It sounds like BDA is not just a tool.
Yeah.
It's changing how we make decisions at a fundamental level.
I think so.
Wow, this research has really changed how I think about BDA.
Yeah.
I used to think it was all about replacing human intuition, but now I see it as more like a way to enhance it.
It really is a powerful partnership.
But it's not always easy, right?
Not always, no.
So for our listeners out there, the people making tough decisions every day.
Right.
What are the key takeaways here? How can they actually use these insights about BDA and heuristics?
That's the big question, right? I think first it's about being skeptical
Okay.
of both BDA and our own intuition.
So don't just blindly trust the data,
Yeah.
but also don't just go with your gut.
Exactly. BDA can be incredibly insightful, but it can also be misled, by incomplete data or bad assumption.
And our intuition can be clouded by bias.
Totally, or like outdated beliefs.
It's like having two advisors,
Mm-hmm.
each with their strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah,
And you got to weigh their input and make the call yourself.
you got it. And that brings us to the second takeaway.
Okay, what's that?
Develop your data literacy.
You're not saying everyone needs to become a data scientist, are you?
No, not at all.
Okay, good.
But these days, it's so important to be able to understand and interpret data.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You need to be able to ask the right questions, spot trends, and understand the limitations of data.
So you can have those more informed conversations with the experts.
Exactly. And make sure you're using BDA effectively.
Awesome. Okay, so what's the final takeaway?
This one's simple. Don't be afraid to experiment.
So like that agile mindset.
Exactly. Don't get stuck trying to find the perfect solution right away.
Right.
Start small, test your hypotheses, and be willing to change course.
Based on what the data's telling you.
Exactly.
It's like that saying, fail fast, fail often.
That's the one.
The beauty of BDA is that it lets us iterate and test things so quickly.